Right. Hello, everyone. Welcome. Um, it's a great privilege and pleasure today to host an event with MAHG alumni, uh, terrific scholars and educators working in the field. I don't want to take any of the time really, so I'll just very briefly introduce the two moderators of our panel on Holocaust, Genocide, and Human Rights Education today, Dr. Mary Johnson and Dr. Jordan Porson. Dr. Jordan Porson is a new faculty member in the School of Education at Stockton and affiliated with the MAHG program. And Dr. Mary Johnson, a longtime historian, educator, activist, and backbone of Holocaust and genocide education globally and intergalactically. So, and it's a pleasure and an honor to have both of you as moderators as well. Looking forward to the discussion. So, please.
So Jordan and I have been looking forward to this discussion since the summer, when we had there was a course in the summer on Holocaust and genocide education. And we had incredible discussions each week. And Jordan joined us one week to talk about assessment, and other scholars joined us other weeks. The thing is, and the reason I'm dreaming of having a meeting like this, and for us to start this discussion at Stockton, about a year ago, the UNESCO, the UN, had I think it was called a webinar, not just a Zoom, it was a webinar with about 5 Holocaust genocide educators about Holocaust education in crisis. And then one from London, Deborah Dwork from the States, somebody from Latin America, all different areas talking about this subject, Holocaust education in crisis. And I think that even though they had crisis there, I think they also meant the challenges, because that's what's really intrigued me. Holocaust education continues to meet new challenges as things change. And it's been really, I think, if you would correct me or not, I think really you could say it starts really in the 70s, a little bit, and then really takes off more in the 80s and 90s. But each decade or so, things change in it and the reasons for it. And right now, I think, are particular things of what's going on in the world right now, of course, with COVID, but also with the passing of many of our survivors who have been the backbone of so much of the education, and also the increasing effort to teach about the Holocaust, genocide, human rights, and sort of broaden out that factor. So I am very interested in hearing from our guests today where things are going in their particular organizations and how we're meeting these challenges. And right now, I don't know about any of you, but meeting classes since 1.5 years of COVID has been a fascinating and I think difficult.
I think difficult to say the least. Yeah.
Maybe fascinating is nice, right? So I'm really interested to sort of hear how we're going to sort of respond to that and meet some of those challenges. So Jordan, tell them a little about what you're thinking too.
Yeah, I think I'd be interested in kind of the experiences you have all had as you make a transition from academic spaces to educational spaces, how you see the work of what you do specifically as related to the Holocaust, engaging with these broader issues, as Mary spoke about, the idea of how Holocaust education engages with things like human rights education or peace education. But perhaps we could just begin with a very basic kind of asking each of you who you are, what your position is, and running through
your work. Your sort of your background, where you are. And then
exactly, and the kind of work you do. Should we move clockwise based on our screen? So Jessica, hi. Not sure if you're seeing.
Hi. Hi, everyone. I want to thank you for inviting me to speak today. But I'm Jessica Holtein. I am the Assistant Manager of Education at the Illinois Holocaust Museum and Education Center. I mentioned before that, like all of our institutions, we all wear many hats. And in the education department, we all work together. One of my main, tasks is outreach. When I started, I was the education outreach coordinator. So I was tasked with fostering relationships with local organizations, Chicago Public Schools, Archdiocese, the Illinois State Board of Education. And I do that as well now as the assistant education manager. And since we're virtual, I've been, reaching out to departments of ed in other states. And I really am the one before it was to get students in the building, get students and teachers in the building. Now it's kind of both virtual and on-site. So I consider myself a teacher. I facilitate virtual and in-person professional development for teachers. I also train docents on new gallery openings or exhibition openings, and train new docents for our docent cadre that we have, which is about 200, and it's growing. I work a lot with our contemporary genocide education and human rights education. So every other year we do a genocide and human rights summer institute. So I work closely with that. And last, but not least, I put together a college leadership summit each year. And now that it's virtual, we get college students all across the country, and we talk about social justice, human rights, and they build leadership skills, learn how to become engaged citizens, and leave empowered to make a difference in their communities. And then there's so much more.
Would you tell everybody just a little bit about how that museum is set up? Has everybody been to Illinois? I don't know if everybody has, but maybe just tell us sort of what it's got. A primary exhibit, and then what else is there? Could you just briefly tell us? Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. We have wonderful exhibitions. We have our primary, of course, our core Carcome Holocaust exhibition, but we also have a youth exhibition, which I love, which is very interactive and focuses on the lessons of the Holocaust, not the graphic nature. It's more about social emotional learning, character education. I think it's about making, positive choices, looking at upstanders and what types of situations where they can make help on behalf of others. So that's for 3rd through 6th grade. And then we opened our Take a Stand Center in 2017, which is more for 7th through 12th graders. It's kind of the upper level youth exhibition because it talks about civic engagement. We have a gallery highlighting 40 different upstanders, both local from Chicago to national to global. And then we have a Take a Stand. Within that, we have a Take a Stand lab to help students kind of find their own sort of activism that interests them, such as fundraising, writing a letter to a senator, and we give them the tools to go out and implement that in their community and make a difference. Yeah.
Great.
So,
Laurie, and maybe when you're describing what you're doing, also mention what Houston has when you go to the museum there too. I mean, it's every one of these museums is just so exciting, and in terms of all that they do. Okay, go ahead.
Well, again, thank you so much for allowing me to be a part of this conversation. I'm really excited to engage with everyone today. But my name is Laurie Garcia. I'm the Senior Associate Director of Education at Holocaust Museum Houston. So for the past 5 years, I was actually leading a program on behalf of the museum that would support outreach into the school community. And so that program was called Educator in Motion. And so that was essentially a free school program where we would send bilingual educators out into the community to work directly with students using interactive presentations on the Holocaust, human rights, social justice, but also leadership. I was one of the bilingual educators for the program, so we were able to work with students in Spanish as well, given the diversity of the Houston community and the fact that we have a large Spanish-speaking population. So I was the coordinator of that program, but also one of the educators for it. So it was just a really incredible experience to be able to engage in conversations with students about these very critical topics. And again, how they can utilize this knowledge to become empowered upstanders today. But recently I transitioned to a new role. And so in my new role, I actually lead Latino initiatives at the museum. And so Latino initiatives was created in order to build a bridge between Houston's Latino community and the museum. Because again, we really want to be representative of the communities that we serve. So in this role, we really want the history, stories, and experiences of the Latino community highlighted in our museum space. So as a part of that, one of the initiatives is to lead the Silverman Latin American Institute, which essentially brings educators from the United States and Latin America together at the museum to explore the history of the Holocaust, human rights, social justice, engaging with scholars and educators in the field to really utilize, really awesome, teaching strategies to be able to get students connected to these topics and issues and to provide them with resources. Another thing that we do, we provide bilingual student and educator programs, either at the museum or out in the community. And one of the other things that I do is lead our literacy programs here at the museum. So we have a digital curriculum trunk program that essentially has 30 iPads in a trunk with preloaded content on the Holocaust and human rights. So students and educators are able to read and utilize those resources. But we've recently launched a new program called Ebooks, which is essentially all of those resources on the cloud. Teachers can borrow class sets of ebooks. We have an elementary, middle, and high school collection. It features a variety of resources like picture books, memoirs, graphic novels to again engage in these topics. And we provide educators with lesson plans and resources to accompany the different titles that are in that collection. So we're really excited to launch that program. And so one of my other projects also is to work with educators. So I'm able to lead professional development trainings and seminars with educators to again explore these very important topics and how to have these conversations in their classroom. So just a little bit of information about the museum. About 2 years ago, we underwent a renovation. So we're now 3 stories. And so in our museum, we have our permanent gallery that explores the history of the Holocaust. We have a lot of artifacts and video archives from our local Houston survivors. We've also incorporated a human rights gallery that explores the evolution of human rights over time, how the Holocaust helped spur the modern Human Rights Day movement. We feature genocides in the 20th century. So again, highlighting that this is still a very important issue that's affecting our global community. That gallery also features the profiles of human rights activists throughout the world that have helped promote and protect human rights, again, labor rights, civil rights, environmental rights. And the gallery ends with a call to action. So it highlights local organizations here in the Houston area that are supporting these human rights issues and how students and community members can get involved. We also have a great gallery called And Still I Write, Young Diarists During War and Conflict. So in that gallery, our visitors are able to explore the diaries of young people that are living through times of conflict. We have several diaries that focus on the experience of the Holocaust. So we have these interactives where you can read excerpts from their diary, learn more about their life and their experience, and even look at photographs and artifacts from that time period. As a part of that collection, we also feature the diary of Stanley Hayemi, who was a Japanese American that experienced internment during World War II. We also feature the diaries of young people in Iraq, Syria, and Bosnia during that genocide. And finally, for our permanent gallery, we also have the Samuel Bach Art Gallery. Samuel Bach is a Holocaust survivor who actually started to create artwork during the Holocaust. His artwork was actually displayed in the Vilna Ghetto during that time period. So he is a very famous and prolific artist that created many artwork, highlighting the experience of his community and of the Jewish community throughout that time period. And so we're very thankful to have his original artwork on display. He donated about 130 of his paintings to the museum, and we have them rotating in that gallery. So again, that's just a little snapshot of our new museum and the galleries that we have available here. We're also a bilingual museum, so we're very excited to be able to offer that resource. And again, really pushing forward in being an accessible space for many different communities and different needs.
And when they opened up that Samuel Bach Gallery, they had Sam right there to show people about the gallery and so forth. Very special. Okay, so we talked about human rights a little bit already, which is very interesting. It seems to be overlapping into thinking about Holocaust genocide education. So we have a very special teacher who has taken this on. Tell us a little, Marissa, about your work.
Okay, so I'm one of the few that doesn't work in a museum. I'm a teacher. I'm a special education teacher, to be specific, in Franklin Township, New Jersey, which is a very diverse district. For those of you that don't know, it's got one of the highest ESL populations in the state. And there's people, I have students that have come from all over. I have students from Nigeria. I have students from Ghana. I have students from Honduras, the Dominican Republic. And I specifically focus on the special education population. And I found that there was an intense need for specific resources for my students because they were not quite grasping a lot of the concepts at, the higher level thinking. So my capstone project was to write a human rights curriculum specifically for special education students. And I've taught it the past 3 years in various ways because of the pandemic. This year I'm most excited about because this is the first year that I'll actually have students in person again and get to actually do the activities in person. Last year, I had half students in person, half students online, and it was a very, very different experience. So that is the perspective that I'm coming from in all of this work.
And because of the students that you're working with, what did you find? Did they grab onto this as something they could get interested in, or?
What I found, and I know that Dr. Siegel and I were talking about this a little bit one day, is that a lot of my students, because of where they've come from, even like in terms of the countries that they've come from and the experiences that they've had in a group that can be marginalized because of their disabilities, they actually have taught me some things just as much as I've kind of taught them. And they have really grasped onto it and understood how important it's become for them to even know their rights so that they're able to even fight for their own rights.
They make a personal connection to some of this too. Yeah. So let's turn to Amanda. And her center, it's a center, right? Is that what we call it?
It's a museum.
It is a museum and a okay,
it's a museum and a center. It's a merger of two organizations. So rather than making it one name, they just combined the two names. So it's the Oregon Jewish Museum and Center for Holocaust Education.
And tell us a little about your work there. Okay.
So my work here is I am the now director of ed at the museum. I started out as the manager of museum ed. And then I got married, I didn't have to change my name. I chose to. And then with that came new business cards and I asked for a new title. So if that ever happens to you, it's a great opportunity to ask for a raise and a new title. So that's how I became the director. And pretty much what I do at the museum is I oversee all teaching and learning for students, for teachers, for visitors who come into our space. So that has drastically changed since the pandemic. I've been in this position just a little over 3 years now. And beforehand, it was really just working on tours, bringing in people here. And now it is so many different virtual things. So virtual visits and virtual, we have created a virtual experience of our core exhibition. So we've just finished our second one. We're working on our third one. They're based in Google Slides so that teachers can navigate them easily with their students. So that's something that we're really excited about. It's not a typical virtual tour, but we've taken the museum content and put it in Google Slides in this really, in this engaging format. Everything is like hyperlinked like crazy. So you're not just clicking next, but you're clicking things that bring you to slide 72, that bring you back to slide 56 or whatever. So, because we really want to teach students and our visitors how to engage with a museum in a fun way that is meaningful as well. We don't just want them walking around being like, check, done, I went to this place and now I've learned everything. We really want to inspire them to be curious, to learn more. So I work with teachers and do PD there. Now, since the pandemic, I do a lot of traveling now in person, but before it was virtually, outreaching to rural communities in Oregon who are never going to come to the museum. Unlike New Jersey, where you can drive everywhere in one day, in Oregon, it is such a large state, and there are really limited major highways. So most of Oregon is really, really rural and have never met a Jewish person before in their life. So really excited to kind of work on a new project where we're going to be interviewing members of the Oregon Jewish community. So it's an authentic way to introduce Jewish people, life, and culture to Oregonians who will never meet a Jewish person until they go to college, likely, if they do. So that's one of the ways that we're trying to combat anti-Jewishness and get people into, I guess, like authentically meet and speak with Jewish people, even though it might not be on Zoom or in person like this. So just lots of, like everybody else said, we all wear so many hats and do so many different things. What's specifically, I think, interesting or different about our museum is, compared to the other two here, we are definitely much, much smaller than the other two. And that's, again, not to say that it's bad or good or better or worse, but it's a very different dynamic in what we have available here. And so our museum has three core exhibitions. One is the Holocaust, one is on Oregon Jews. So that's our two pillars. And then the third actually looks at the history of Oregon and how people have harmed each other in this state and how people have resisted. So one of the things that we really try to focus on is, as we're learning about the Holocaust, it's so easy for students and people to think that happened so far away, so long ago, in a different place, to people that I don't have any relationship with. And so when they're in this space, we want them to think about the precursors to that and how those precursors have manifested right here in our own state. So really making that very, very local connection. And then the other thing I'll mention, which is now similar to, actually, I don't know does Texas have a mandate?
No, we don't have a formal mandate, but I think about a year ago, they did have a Texas Holocaust Remembrance Week that was put into legislation.
Yeah. So I want to say my third week on the job out here, I was asked to write a mandate for the state of Oregon. So that is what I did. I worked with members here and I looked at other states and I looked at their mandates, what I liked, what I didn't like, what did I wanted to change about it. And so since that mandate went into effect in 2020, but of course, like what else went into effect in 2020? It was near impossible for any teacher to take anything on in 2020. So Oregon has 3 new mandates that all come into effect at the same time: ethnic studies, tribal history, shared history, and this one. So a lot of my work is working with the Department of Ed and teaching teachers, how do you teach these 3 super important histories holistically in a way that you are providing each history with the importance that it needs, but not separating them out so that people think that these are all like different and don't connect in a way at all. So I do a lot of work with ethnic studies and tribal history and modeling for teachers. How do you show the overlaps between those histories in a way that pushes students to look at patterns throughout history? So that was kind of long and jumbled, but I'm sure you'll all have questions to follow up with afterwards.
Jordan, do you want to?
Yeah, so I have a ton of questions. First off, thank you all. This is fantastic. I want to start with the question of space. So I noticed that Jessica and Amanda, mostly you work partnering with formal schooling, or Amanda, you work with teachers who then bring this kind of work into school. Marissa, you work directly in a school, and Laurie, it sounds like you work with schools, but also partner with more community-based work. What is the role of kind of these different educational spaces in your work?
I can definitely take a stab at that one first while everybody else is thinking. You're welcome. I'm not going to do this every time. So I think a lot of it also depends on how big your staff is at the museum. So I'm the only full-time educator at the museum. So my role is specifically really to work with students and teachers. The adult education is not something that we have the capacity to really dive into yet. In that sense, I wish we could, but I'm only one person and there's only so much I can do. So I'd say for the community supports, I run a museum educator group for cultural institutions in Oregon. And so this past summer, we created an unconference. So we created this really great resource guide for teachers that highlighted memory and how do we, my stutter is so bad today. How do we remember? So it came from an art lens. It came from a Jewish lens. It came from a Japanese lens, a Chinese lens, a native lens, a settler lens even. So that is something that like I'm trying to do is work with other cultural institutions in the state who also all have really small departments where only 1 or 2 people are working on this so that we can all elevate each other and grow our outreach that way in a really sustainable way. Because I think that's one of the biggest limitations and challenges I see in my position is there's so many school districts, so many teachers all over a huge state. And, you know, Jersey is like densely populated. Houston is huge. And then Texas is even bigger. And Illinois is like also huge. So we're all dealing with such big spaces, but with such small departments. So a lot of it is really trying to prioritize where you're going to make the most impact and then thinking about sustainable growth beyond that.
And just a quick question. If you start out sort of as a Holocaust Center or museum, but you're working with all of these other areas, right? Is that an effort to show the interconnections with so many of these and to make so many aware of it? It's a real challenge, isn't it? So
I think for that, it's an opportunity to do really authentic outreach to people. So the people that follow the art museum are going to perhaps never have been exposed to our museum before this, but if we're all coming together for this one connected theme, it ended up just being a really great way for us to reach new audiences and get them to learn about us. And so although we come at it with different perspectives, I think that's what makes it really interesting is it shows all of the different approaches and how we're all connected in a way to one topic and the different times and places and approaches that you can take with it. So giving teachers more opportunity to look at that rather than just handing them one lesson plan and then say, this is the only way to do it.
Which I think
some of the others could take that wonderful question.
Yeah, I don't want to jump ahead. So that does remind me of a related question, but I'd love to hear from other folks before.
And then we'll come back to that.
Yeah.
Okay. So space, Jessica.
Space. Well, in outreach terms, I mean, it's unlimited now, right? With virtual, we created virtual field trips for, the Make a Difference youth exhibition, the Take a Stand Center, our Carcome Holocaust exhibition. And, I am reaching out, like I said earlier, about, departments of ed in Nebraska, Kentucky, and conferences, like reaching teachers through Kentucky Council of Social Studies conferences, like all of these different areas. And then we localize, like we focus on initiatives within Chicago Public Schools. We had a Mandela exhibition and we reached 2,000 CPS students and teachers with our virtual Mandela field trip. And we brought in a speaker for them. And, it's kind of, we do work in rural Illinois as well. There's a lot of spaces down south Illinois. And before the pandemic, we tried to do about 3 professional developments down south in areas that there's not a lot of Holocaust education being taught. So we try to help them do, we could hone in on a certain topic, a subject of the Holocaust, or we'll do an overview of how to teach, teaching the Holocaust with primary resources and memoirs. So, oh my gosh. And, we focus on Illinois State Board and superintendents and districts, and we work with other, we're working with Iowa. It's unlimited right now with this virtual world, I think. And there's a lot of great resources out there that a lot of teachers need to discover, I think. So.
And Jessica, most of that work is still centered geographically. It's moving all over the place, but it's mostly still centered in formal education in schools specifically. Oh,
yes. And I mean, the museum, of course, I think I always focus on the education department, but we do reach, we have adult group tours that come in. We have public programs for adults with so many different types of public programs that connect with our special exhibitions. Like I said, Mandela, we had a special exhibition, we have one right now on Rise Up, the Stonewall and the LGBTQ rights movement. So we'll do public programs surrounding that topic, about 2 or 3, and then we'll do book and authors. We do theater programs, all for teachers, adults, whoever wants to attend. That was all put online. Like we put the whole museum online during 2020 and 2021. So now we are just starting to do hybrid programs for public programs. And that's, we're just learning as we're going with everything. So, but I'm always thinking about the education department, students and educators, professional development, field trips. That's where my head is at always.
Yeah, Yeah, and I think I can share next. So in terms of our school outreach and the goal of educating about the Holocaust in that space, I think it always comes back to accessibility, but also empowering students. So like was mentioned already, not everyone has access to a Holocaust museum or a Holocaust education center. Some schools don't have the funding to be able to visit a museum in person, but we still really want to be able to engage in these very powerful conversations and to provide students with these opportunities. So through our school outreach program, we try to kind of break down some of those barriers and extend the walls of our museum beyond our space here and out into the community with students in schools. So again, just really being able to, talk to students about these universal themes that are present all throughout history. We always tell students that the Holocaust is a human story. These were everyday people just like me and you. They were living through a time period of injustice where we see prejudice, discrimination, hatred, and apathy, helping students think about the role that everyday people play in society, but also how they can start to utilize this knowledge to kind of, think about issues in their school, in their community, and how they can take an active role in creating a more positive society. So again, really just kind of empowering students to think about these issues, connecting the past to the present. And in terms of our museum space, again, we really want it to be community centered, to have visitors feel like this is a place for them, that they feel represented within the walls of our museum. So we've been very grateful to have, again, a lot of really great educators that have helped push to incorporate these different narratives, experience, and histories into our space. So for example, as the Holocaust is a story of human rights issues, we've brought in a lot of really great exhibitions to connect it to other time periods, other communities, other histories throughout, the world, not only in the past, but also people that were experiencing contemporary issues. So just as a short example, we were able to bring Dolores Huerta Revolution in the Fields to the museum. And so that was the story of Dolores Huerta, who was a labor activist who really tried to advocate for the human rights of migrant workers that were working in the field. They were exposed to very dangerous working conditions, were not being paid fairly for their work. And so they really tried to advocate for the workers' rights, as well as their children that were experiencing a lot of those harmful effects as well, and how it was impacting their life. And so it was really great to kind of see visitors interacting with that exhibit to help make that connection of human rights, how important it is, and how everyday individuals became a part of that movement to create changes that we're, I'm so thankful to benefit from now. And also the fact that it was a bilingual exhibit that we were able to bring in. Again, we have a very large Spanish-speaking population. So we heard a lot of stories of visitors coming into the space and reflecting, wow, this is my first time to a museum, and I could actually understand and engage with this history because it was available in my language. And so again, the museum is making efforts to be more accessible to a variety of different needs and communities, because again, we really want to be a space for the community and to have that reflected not only in our education programs, but also in our public programs, but also in our teacher trainings, and really integrating it in everything that we do.
So Laurie, could you just give us a snapshot of like the numbers in 1 year that you reached through that outreach program while you were heading that? What is approximate numbers? What was it?
Sure. So when I started the Educator in Motion program, and again, that's when we send museum educators out into the school to do programs with students. It was a bilingual program. It's also free. That's another great way to be more accessible. We're so thankful to have grant funding and donor support to be able to offer these services for free, because again, a lot of schools deal with funding issues and really don't have access to a lot of these opportunities. But through this program, the first year, and again, it was kind of like creating creating all of the programs, building that outreach, making connections in the community, we were able to reach out to, I believe, over 25,000 students. About 3 or 4 years later, when we had 3 educators that were a part of the program, we were able to reach out to almost 40,000 students. It was just really incredible to be able to have, again, these conversations with students, with educators all throughout the greater Houston region, to be able to bring these resources to them, but also using virtual capabilities and technology to also really expand that outreach. So it's a really wonderful program that we're very thankful to be a part of.
Marissa, you want to tackle Willem's space? Or?
Yeah. So like when I'm thinking about this question, and I was thinking about like what everybody else has been saying, from like the standpoint of a teacher that's in a school right now, I think our biggest problem has been, do we have the funding? Do we have the means to actually go to different museums and go to these places? And obviously with the pandemic, we haven't been allowed to really take field trips. This is the first year, and it's very limited what we're being allowed to do. And on top of that, like, you have to also find room in a lot of the curriculums, like where is this going to fit in? And you have to be able to justify why you're taking students these places, or why you want to even do a virtual field trip or have somebody come in, because you can't necessarily come into the room or even come in over Zoom or anything to speak to the students. And for me, I do it from the English standpoint. So I often fit it in when they're studying, say, like night, or in my lab class, I have a little bit more freedom, and that's where like the human rights curriculum comes in, because as long as I'm teaching them a skill, like communication skill, I can kind of do it in whatever way I can, but it's a lot about creativity and how to kind of make it fit what it needs to fit.
So I know we have some, I really like, there are some very practical questions, but I do want to get back to, I think both Amanda and Laurie were hitting on something that I found really interesting, and I think we probably all struggle with in our study and our work in topics like these. So it's great to see these linkages you're creating. I'm thinking particularly about the work of Dolores Huerta and how that becomes part of the curriculum of the museum for you, Laurie. But how do you balance this tension between creating these really powerful linkages and yet showing the uniqueness of something like the Holocaust? And open to, I think this is something that I imagine we all deal with.
We all wrestle with that.
Yes,
right?
This is constantly, we're going to have to always grapple with it. So how, in your work specifically, do all 4 of you?
I see Amanda's ready.
Yeah.
Laurie first.
Sure. So again, it's been really wonderful to be able to interact with students as we explore this history. So I think the thing that we try to do is that we're able to make these connections, but also understanding the Holocaust in its context. So for example, we kind of like talk about the Holocaust in different stages. We express a lot of those like warning signs. So for example, one of the exercises that I would do with students would be highlighting a lot of the anti-Jewish laws that were created, so again, emphasizing that idea that the Holocaust didn't start overnight. It didn't start with concentration camps and gas chambers where millions of people were being murdered, right? It started with words that said one group was superior above another. It started with propaganda, hate speech, and even laws taking away basic human rights and freedoms. So when students, one of the exercises that I do, they actually kind of read some of the different laws that were used to take away basic rights and freedoms from Jewish people. Even at the beginning in the 1930s, they're able to see how a lot of their social, economic, and political freedoms are being taken away. So we're able to explore it at that time period in that context, how it was impacting Jewish people, what the environment was like. But again, students are slowly able to make these connections that are, really like relevant and very powerful to them. So For example, a lot of students feel very frustrated and angry when they learn about some of this. How could this happen? I can't believe that they were treated this way, that they were dehumanized, that people were not kind of like speaking up about this issue. So whenever they engage with some of those laws, they also start to make a connection like, oh, some of these laws remind me of kind of what happened in the United States when there were certain communities that also had their rights taken away through laws. And so again, we're able to make that connection to other parts in history, but again, focusing on the Holocaust and what was happening in that context at that time period.
I love that, Laurie. And just to add on to it, I think a lot of what I try to do with teachers and students is ask them, why are they comparing? What is your rationale in comparing this? If it's to quantify or justify what is better or worse, obviously, like comparing pain is inappropriate and unproductive. So yesterday when I was working with a teacher prep program, I asked them, I was like, what makes a comparison productive and meaningful? And then what makes it unproductive? And so having them think beyond like this binary of like better or worse and moving beyond that is really, really important. And I don't think as a teacher, I wasn't ever really taught how to do that, how to make those appropriate connections. But, this is something that's like so relevant to me in the moment right now, because we're expanding our speakers bureau to include survivors from Cambodia as well. And some of the survivors from the Holocaust are really reluctant to welcome them in. And I was speaking with one of the survivor who really wants this to happen. And her response was, Amanda, how can we expect other people to accept our pain if we can't accept theirs? And I thought that was just so powerful for one survivor to say that if I want people to listen to me, then I also have to listen to other people. And I thought that cut through this idea of like, well, I'm not being heard. And I think when other people put down other people's experiences, it's this whole zero-sum thinking of when they share their story, what are they taking away from mine? Now mine seems less important. And it's not about that. It's not about comparing that. So it's really working with audiences and getting them to realize, why are we comparing?
Should we go to some of these questions or?
Yeah, this is great there, given the.
Yeah, I'd like to go to question number 2. The most difficult things you faced in the field of Holocaust genocide education, but I want to add something to that. Who did the question come from? It must have come on the chat. Someone?
It's from iPhone.
iPhone, some iPhone.
Thank you,
Okay,
iPhone.
great,
Yes.
Great question. But right now, because I'm running into this quite a bit, teachers are concerned. If you're going to talk about controversial issues or something might touch on that awful word race or discrimination.
We can't say class.
So are you running into this at all as you're working with teachers, or as Marissa, as you're in a school? Is this coming up, or is that not interfering with what you're doing, or how are you dealing with it?
I was actually thinking about this as we were kind of having this discussion. I haven't faced it in my district itself because, like I said, my district's very diverse. I think we're being taught to be very culturally responsive in our teaching. They're pushing for us to teach a lot of these issues. And so I'm not running into it there, but where I live, actually, there's a big issue right now with the school board election, and things are being politicized in terms of like what's in the curriculum and what should be allowed to be taught. And one of the big things is the whole, in New Jersey, they had the LGBTQ mandate that went into effect. And so they have like the New Jersey Department of Education has, like curriculum, they have like books and suggested things. And the town that I live in is in one of the most conservative spaces in New Jersey. And the school board, like, it's being very politicized as to like, oh, what does that entail? Are you teaching our students, you know, things that are inappropriate, like morally and all of these things? And so I've kind of run into it there. And I also know, like, when I was down in Texas, there's a lot of talk too in Texas. So Laurie, you could probably speak to this a little bit about like the critical race theory and all of these ideas. So I'm not as much afraid in my district, but I definitely see where it's coming in to be a very fearful time for teachers in some other locations and like what they teach.
I see some other heads nodding. Jump in.
I also wonder, sorry,
Okay,
I also wonder how that kind of returns to the role of space for everyone but Melissa. You're in non-formal educational settings, and I wonder where increasingly some teachers are constrained in how they teach and what they teach. If you all see your roles, I don't want to ignore the question of what challenges you face, but as offering kind of a little additional flexibility and not having oversight, but having the kind of open space to still engage these topics in a more direct way without having kind of this external.
let me add to that, or are you feeling the pressure on that even in
Yeah,
your
that's a good
space?
point. I shouldn't
Yeah.
assume it's, yeah. Sorry, Laurie, I saw you had unmuted as I think it was necessary.
No, yeah. I mean, in Texas, we are dealing with a lot of these challenges. You know, the legislature, again, has put in, you know, mandates, you know, talking about critical race theory, and at least the teachers that we've interacted with, they do feel a little bit nervous about how to engage in historical topics that could be considered or framed as, you know, controversial. And again, how to have these conversations with students, what resources to utilize. So again, we at least just try to be a space to have conversation and dialogue, to be able to kind of like look at this history, to provide engaging resources and activities, to be able to kind of think about these issues. But I just know that for a lot of teachers, and for us at least, it's been a little bit challenging, but we're still kind of trying to work through that, to be able to provide resources to kind of, again, tackle these topics and issues.
I think one of my biggest challenges, and Laurie and Jessica, I'd love to hear your approaches on this. So I went down to rural Oregon on the Idaho border earlier in the month. And for those of you who don't know anything about the state, Oregon, I didn't ever want to move here, never envisioned ever leaving the East Coast or Jersey. Then I got the job out here and I absolutely love it. But Oregon is, oh my gosh, what a state. It is a polarized state for sure. Really, really rural, except for, you know, Portland pretty much, which is a bubble. And so I've had a big learning curve here. But when I went down to that town there where there are like a big district is 94 students in a district. Some of them have 5 kids in a district. Like, it was mind-boggling to me that 5 kids in a district. What? But as I was talking about learning about the Holocaust versus learning from the Holocaust, and what are these lessons, I asked the teachers, what are lessons that you get from this? And one response was how the governments overreach, and how we have to make sure that they don't take away our personal freedoms. And I was like, okay, not 100% incorrect. Like, I can totally see where you're getting that lesson from. And it was so eye-opening to me because I had never really considered how rural communities, or perhaps more conservative-leaning communities, may address the lessons of the Holocaust differently and get them differently than perhaps more urban communities or more left-leaning communities. And that's not to say that, again, one is better or worse, but like, what are they getting out of that? And how do I approach those districts differently to make sure that they're not misusing this history. Because from that government overreach, taking away our freedoms, then comes the yellow passports for vaccines. Like that's where that line went. And like my job when I went down there that day was to not make waves, but was to be like, I can be a resource for you. And I need to start to build that trust with you. But that was a big, like a smack in the face, like, whoa, I am out of my comfort zone and I'm not sure what I'm doing here quite yet. And I don't know how to approach that quite yet. So I don't want to take over your questions, but I think like that's something I'm really interested in hearing from you, because that's my biggest challenge at the moment. As most of this state is rural, I don't know how to approach them right now.
And it's a big area to approach.
Yeah. And luckily we have a donor who specifically wants to cover the cost of training in rural communities, which most of these places are really excited for me to go down and be with them. The minute that you can make it free, they're like, yes, please come. But, CRT, we have the same stuff going on here in a lot of communities. And fortunately, the Department of Ed is not supporting that. And there are lawsuits going against it. So Oregon is more liberal leaning in the courts and things like that. But if you look at a map of the state, it is rural and red. And so there's a lot of resentment growing. And I can see that resentment. And when I look at parallels to why people engage in hate and violence against others, resentment is a part of that. And so it's like balancing, how do you make them feel like, not that they're valid, but yeah.
Or somehow the topic brings up things that they're thinking about, but in another way. I mean, it sounds like, yeah. So Jessica, have you come into this at all?
Well, I mean, with regard to that, I think what we've done at the museum we've created a Courageous Conversations workshop for teachers, administrators, parents can ask for it. And it's about those difficult conversations. I think we need to bring these things up and talk about it and understand why are you thinking that? Like, what makes you feel like that? And try to come to that, understanding of, people think differently. I also think, it comes back to empathy for the other. For not for the other, but for the other person that you're speaking to that may have different views. But when it comes to the Holocaust, these are the lessons we're learning, the lessons of the Holocaust. We're teaching through those, difficult conversations. And, I think that's one of the things I think for Marissa, I was thinking about when you were talking about, the issues that you're having within your space. I was just, a lot of teachers are having the same issues, I think. And a lot of, we can bring in Holocaust education into civics. We can, where does it fit, right? It fits into civics. It fits into SEL and character education. And it fits so well with so many different topics. And I don't know, I just wanted to add on to that because I was just talking to a curriculum director and she was like, I need to look at your resources in a different way. I've sent out, promoted, the Holocaust virtual field trip, the Karkomi Holocaust virtual field trip, the Take a Stand virtual field trip. But I realized that, we need to spin this in a way that makes it more relevant for our teachers and really make it fit in to what they need at this moment. And I think there's a lot of times we're not looking at the needs of the teachers. We're just thinking that, this is the history, this is, they need to teach this in their classroom, but how, and what do you need from us that will help you to get these lessons across to your students? If that kind of fits into the conversation.
So this is kind of an unnatural and hard pivot, but given the time constraints, perhaps we can collapse these two questions. So there's a question from the chat. One says, how did the Masters of Arts in Holocaust and Genocide Studies program prepare you for your job? And we can add to that another question, which is, do you have any advice for new students in the MAHG program? And that's for all four of you.
That'll prepare you to be jack of all trades.
Yes, exactly. To take on the single job that is many jobs that you all have.
I can answer this one pretty quickly. So I'd say the biggest thing that it prepared me for was how to ask better questions and critical thinking, and how do I pass on how to ask better questions to students and teachers. So that's something I really got out of it, was that critical thinking skill. And then what would I recommend? I would say take a variety of classes. I wish I took more on post-war afterwards, because so many people asked me about it. And I was like, I never took a class on it, sorry. Or about, just a wide ranging of things. So if you're interested in something, cool, take a class, maybe two, but don't focus all of your beans there, if that's even a saying.
It is now.
I can even piggyback off of that, because I think that I'm the one that is probably the most recent person that's going to be graduating from this program that's in this conversation. And I feel like that diversity of like taking these different classes and kind of getting that diverse education is definitely important. Like even looking at me, and I've been in it for a while because I can only take one class at a time. I really wish that there's things that I could have taken that I didn't take, that I didn't get the chance to take. And I think that that's probably the most important thing, is like, it's going to be, I think the degree is going to get you what you make of it. And so depending on what classes you choose to take and how diverse you choose to get with the degree will probably depend on like you as a person and what you choose to do.
Yeah, and I think for me, the program helped me, of course, with historical knowledge and content of this very important history, not only the Holocaust focus, but also other genocides. But through a lot of the different opportunities that were available through the program, I was able to gain job skills. So for example, research, working with different groups, whether it be students, teachers, or the community. It also prepared me for learning how to be a part of managing projects and initiatives. So getting that kind of skill set in place. And so along with that, I guess my advice would be to take advantage of all of the really wonderful opportunities that are available to you through the program and through the Holocaust Resource Center. So again, there were graduate assistantships that were super helpful with allowing me to gain the skills and knowledge that I'm utilizing now in my position. It also helped me gain, like academic skills and knowledge, and the travel abroad program as well was really fantastic to be able to study that history in the places where it happened, to be able to connect to Holocaust survivors, to remind you on those challenging days why you're doing this work. It's to honor their memory, the communities that were unfortunately destroyed during that time period, but really honoring their legacy. So again, there's just really wonderful options available, whether you want to go into museum, education, or even nonprofit organizations. So just really plugging in wherever you can. They also have a great graduate student program that you can be a part of. So just lots of great opportunities out there.
I agree with Laurie. I think taking as many opportunities as you can to learn just public programs and networking with other scholars that come in. I thought it was an amazing, and so many classes you brought in different scholars to talk to us and to learn about their research and what they do. And even right now, people are learning from us. And I think it's taking advantage of those opportunities. And one of the things I think is, when you're looking for a job and if you're in an internship, always say yes. That was my thing. Just say yes and go for it and see what comes. Make those connections, with your peers, with the leaders of your organization. Just show that you are interested in the topic and gain more knowledge and more skills as you say yes to all these different opportunities that you have.
And I think that probably helps you in a way to be so adaptable. Well, we were talking a couple of weeks ago about your work, Jessica, and you said, I do so many different exhibits and I'm going, but we can adapt as things come up because you've tried so many things. And I think that's true for all of you. Just that curiosity, not just all the courses, but also just the curiosity to find out different things. It's really quite amazing how you adapted it to each of your places. I think, do we have time for one more? Is that what we want to do?
I just want to add one more thing, Mary, is keep in touch with your professors. Get their emails, stay in touch with them. It was so nice to have Mary come out here and present to teachers in Oregon. It's so nice to be able to call Roz up with a question whenever I need. So keep in touch with your professors. They are such an amazing resource for you.
What do you think should be our...
Which one should be our last one? How to deal with, okay. Teach students how to deal pushback from parents and community. Whoa, that's a good one. Okay.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Within 5 minutes.
Right.
We want to hear from all four of you. Does the MAHG program teach you how to do this? And I'd like to add kind of, how have you learned to deal with this on your own? Mm-hmm. How to navigate, respond to, and generally deal with, they put in quotes, pushback from parents and community.
I'll tackle this one first, as the classroom teacher in here. I think for me, when it comes to dealing with pushback from parents, a lot of it, and a lot of how I learned to deal with it, is actually having a good relationship with the administrators that I work on with having a lot of support from my administration and knowing which administrators are most supportive. So like, if you're having an issue, like I know which administrator to go to first, because I know which one's going to be the most helpful in dealing with that issue. Like which one is the most trustworthy, which one kind of is in support of what I'm doing more than anything. So I think it's knowing who to go to for advice. And if you do have like somebody that is higher than you, especially as a teacher, like an administrator, knowing which ones to turn to, who is going to support you. And if you don't have a supportive administration, it's also kind of talking to colleagues who maybe have been at it longer, who might be able to give you advice as like a veteran teacher, and saying, okay, I've dealt with a parent who is angry about this. It's a little bit different, but here's how I dealt with it. And here's like what I did. So that's kind of my stance on that.
Find co-conspirators and people to stand in solidarity with you. Yeah.
Yes.
And that's what we do with our Courageous Conversations workshop, is to really, have teachers converse with each other about their difficulties and their pushback, either from administration or from parents, because we give kind of certain scenarios of, if there was a hate symbol on a building, how would you discuss this with your students? How would you go to your administration? And some people say they're not supported. Some people say they are very supported by, having these difficult conversations in the classroom. But I think giving that space for teachers to support each other and help each other and talk through these issues that they're going through together is a great way. And I think, like Laurie said, building a space for the community. I think our museum has always been that safe space for people, especially for teachers, for professional development, where we want to have open conversations and just allow them to work together. So I don't come into contact with parents directly and pushback, but I hear from teachers about that.
Yeah, Jessica, I think I definitely echo what you're saying. As a museum, we don't really deal with parent pushback. I've gotten a couple of emails from parent chaperones, but oftentimes they just want to be heard and listened to. You can't shut them down. You're just like, thank you for voicing your opinion. But our museums are the spaces where people go to have hard conversations. So yesterday I got a call from a teacher saying that a boy in a different class went up to another boy and said, "I hate Jews." And she was like, "What do I do?" So they come to us in these situations because their administration was never trained in it. And I don't think I was like trained on it in the MAHG program. I think because my experience in the MAHG program was more historical content. It wasn't teacher practical application. That was my education degree coming into play. But it's things along those lines where teachers, community members, we even had the Timbers Army, which is our soccer team's like fan club. They were having issues with the front house of the Timbers Club, and they came to the museum to have a civil conversation and talk to each other. So we're that space that facilitates that to de-escalate things.
Yeah, I mean, it was said so beautifully already, but yeah, essentially that idea of creating an open space for dialogue and conversation, not really shutting anybody down, like was mentioned earlier, just like, oh, that's a really interesting point. Can you tell me more? Helping to maybe clarify some misconceptions that they might have about this history, or they may make connections that they don't realize why that might not be productive. So again, just having an engaging experience. And again, being open to that dialogue with people.
Yeah, well, just a last minute addition was I was also going to say, they do want to be heard a lot of times when parents bring up issues or the community brings up issues. And so what you're saying too, like you can combat that by correcting, like, okay, this is a miscommunication, or being able to say like, this is why I'm teaching this. So I know you're upset, but here is the rationale of exactly why this is being taught and what, the reasoning is behind this.
It's just, I think one of the best things that I try to teach teachers is how do you say no to somebody without telling them no or that they're wrong? And if that's a skill that you can harness, it will take you places.
That's great.
That's a great way to end too.
Yeah, I think there is plenty more to say, and hopefully this is the beginning of a conversation. I don't want to put Mary on the spot, but I think she should have the last word. So I'll just say thank you to you all, and thank you to everyone for putting this on, and to the participants who are watching, and everyone. But yeah.
Just want to thank you all too. I hope we got many of the questions. This was just a very important discussion, and I thank you all. And I think you've touched on some of these challenges that we have right now. And you've given us some great ideas. I love this business of having difficult conversations in safe spaces, and being able to, that word space is so important. So thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you for this whole afternoon.
Thank you, Mary. Thank you to all four of you. This is great. It feels weird to clap because there are few of us in the room.
And just quickly, one of the things that I really loved about the MAHG program was how supportive we were of each other as a student cohort, but also how we had such great mentors in the program. So again, if you have any questions or would like to continue the conversation, I posted my information in the chat, but again, we're just here as a resource. But thank you all for this opportunity.
Thank you. Thank you so much.